So welcome everyone to the next program in the Berkeley Law BCLT Student Career Series. Once again, Wilson Sonsini has been kind enough to donate a little more time to us to explain a practice area that you don't come across a lot in law school, but in the tech world, it's among, if not the most important of the practice groups out there. Definitely one of the largest in terms of the number of skills, the number of different areas that you can go into. So I think what we're hoping to do today is tell you a little bit about what tech transactions means at the highest level, and then what it looks like with different client types and different firms. Those of you that know Wilson Sonsini, know that they're one of the giants in this space, and so they can really tell you a lot about what they do and a lot about what's happening in the tech industry as a whole. As in many of our presentations, you're going to see that the group is national in scope. It's not just a local group, and this is two speakers that really point that out. So we have Miranda Biven. She's a partner out of the San Diego office, so you're going to notice a geographic spread here. And Shivang Patel, who's an associate here in the Palo Alto office. So you're going to see that these practices aren't just isolated or siloed in one office, one place. Just not the way the modern law firm works, at least around tech transactions. So with that, thank you both for coming. And I want to start with the broadest question I can. What does it mean to be a tech transactions lawyer?
So I'll have a go at that to start with, and Shivang, I'll kick it to you after that. So the easiest way to describe a tech transactions lawyer is to say we're licensing lawyers at our narrowest. We license intellectual property and technology, but that's a very sort of narrow view. Really, what tech transactions lawyers do is all kinds of commercial and operational agreements and strategic arrangements for clients in pretty much every industry space that you can think of. It's easy to define our practice by exclusion. The practice is not financing and fundraising and general corporate work. It's not IP counseling, and it's not real estate, but it's pretty much everything else that is a contract that a company that has technology or intellectual property might do. And now Shivang can correct what we both do for a living.
I think you said it pretty well. What the way I like to think about it is anything that touches on the company's products or technology. Thinking about how to monetize it, how to protect it, and then just your run-of-the-mill kind of commercial contracts, some NDAs, customer agreements, supplier relationships. So it kind of runs the gambit.
I love that phrase, strategic, and that really defines, I think, maybe best what you do. Companies aren't being bought and sold to each other, M&A, classic M&A work that you hear about law school on a frequent basis. They are doing these types of deals where I license you my technology, I in-license your technology. This is a daily event because no technology company anywhere stands 100% alone anymore. They're all working together, and not to make it seem, well, maybe I'm trying to make it seem more important because it is. This is the grease that makes Silicon Valley, makes the tech industry work, is getting companies to work together. So anytime one company is talking to another company and not buying it is pretty much your domain, right?
That's right. But most of the companies that we work with and most tech transactions practices work with don't have by themselves the resources or the financing or the territorial breadth or capabilities to take the product that they've developed and get it to market. And so in order to do that, most companies need to collaborate in a strategic way with somebody who has one of those types of capabilities that they can bring to help a company get there. Some of the companies that we work with obviously are large multinational companies and other tech transactions practices too, but even they need expertise from others to be able to move their products and technology forward.
That's a great transition. And Shivang, maybe you could pick this up about what types of clients do you work with and others work with in the tech transaction space?
All sorts. It's really quite varied. It's actually one of my favorite parts about doing what I do. So I think folks tend to believe that tech transactions groups work with what they would traditionally think of as tech companies, right? Or life sciences companies. And I think it's more than that. It's any technology adjacent company as well, or any tech enabled company as well. So I often like to joke with folks, name an industry. Chances are myself or Miranda or any one of our colleagues in the group have probably worked on some matter related to that industry in the past month.
Yeah, in a sense, the part of the technology transactions practice that I work in and other life sciences lawyers work in is way easier to describe than the aspect of the practice that Shivang works in. So life sciences companies, you pretty well define them there, therapeutics, medical devices, med tech, digital health, and all variations of life sciences technology, but what Shivang does is everything that's not that, which is a pretty broad swath of things from autonomous vehicles to e-gaming to clean energy. I'm constantly impressed by the number of industries that my colleagues who are not life sciences transactional attorneys touch on a daily basis.
Well, we'll talk in a minute about the difference between life sciences and high tech type transactions. But really, before we went into that, wanted to follow up. I heard something about company size, and you mentioned that, Shivang, you mentioned that the types of companies you work with, size of the companies you work with, really provides a lot of enjoyment, a lot of variation. So, what's the difference between working for a startup and a giant multinational when it comes to tech transactions?
On the startup side, and what we call first circle, second circle, third circle, it's just how we kind of differentiate between an early stage company, a mid stage company, and then a large company. But in the early mid stage life of the life cycle, it's really about understanding what's important to the client, right? Because you're not always going to get every aspect of every little point that you want, right? So it's a lot more strategic in thinking through, for an early stage company, the most important thing is to get their product off the ground, right? So how do we put together form agreements and basically train their salespeople to be able to do deals in a way that gets them the sale, but also doesn't take on undue risk for the company. And then as they get larger, we start to kind of dial that back to, okay, now we have the base, we have the traction. Now, how do we start focusing on protecting the company, growing that pot, and in preparation for either potential acquisition, an IPO, or other exit scenario.
In Miranda, in your world, do you see the different life sciences world? Do you see the difference in sizes of companies?
We do, Wayne, in the sense that the types of issues that companies have to address as they get more mature, as Shivang noted, tends to evolve. I think the thing is that is the same for all of the clients that we work with is we do get to be very involved as technology transactions lawyers in the business and the business strategy and how that gets implemented through their contractual arrangements. And that doesn't tend to change as the companies grow. We still need to really have a very good understanding of the technology and the business plans. the level of risk and the amount of scrappiness may tend to decrease as companies grow in terms of their capabilities and resources and financing capabilities.
So the phrase you use there is you tend to be involved with company business, and maybe that would be great to dig into a little bit about what that. I guess there are only two ways you can really do it. I do a deal, somebody throws it over the fence, I do it, I give it back to them. I don't really work with them again, or I work with them every year, but I'm not a counselor. I'm just a person that does contracts. Sounds to me like that is not the tech transaction environment that either of you are describing.
I think that's right. In order to really help our clients implement smaller operational arrangements and large strategic transactions, we need to understand their technology and how they work. That means being involved with the business, working with the business, the scientists, the business people, the management teams. And I think where close as you can get to being an in-house counselor while still having the benefits of being in a law firm, the relationships that we build with our clients and most tech transactions groups in the Valley build with their clients are long-term relationships. We might see a company when it's just the two founders and take them to the point where they have their strategic exit, which and the capital markets are open is an IPO, and when they're not, tends to be an acquisition. But the wonderful benefit of working in the area that we work in, and particularly Silicon Valley companies, is you get to watch that evolution.
And I'll add, we get to see so many transactions of the same type in all the different industries. And so that really helps us get a sense of all the different ways you can do the same deal, right? And so when clients come to us for help, sometimes it's we have this customer help us put together an agreement, right? And as you know, Wayne, those agreements can have all sorts of different terms in them. You can think about structuring a deal in a variety of different ways. And a lot of what we do is, like Miranda said, we'll first start by understanding the company, the business, the product, their goals, and then we'll help kind of shape the deal to fit that, right? And help put them in the best position they can be to achieve them.
But I think one of the things, Wayne, that you touched on was, do we just come in and do a deal, write an agreement and then disappear? Mostly in our practice, that is not the case, right? You have to live with the consequences of what you built, for better or for worse. You evolve with relationships as the clients, evolve with those relationships too. And we also are often fortunate enough to help on the front end, kind of thinking about what the business strategy is and structuring the transactions too.
Well, if you look at nearly all large law firms, they have a corporate department, which is what I consider the classic mergers and acquisitions. They have a commercial litigation department, might have IP or other types of litigation in that, but nearly everybody has those two departments, and they're usually kind of balanced in size. What about a tech transactions department? Is that just a standard part of all big law firms these days?
I'll take that, Shivang, and then you add to it. I think it is a standard part of law firms that tend to represent companies in the tech, with a technology focus. So life sciences or, all of the other technology focuses. It may be a little less prominent in firms that are purely litigation focused, for example, or firms that tend to represent financial institutions. They may have a function that's like a technology transactions function, but it may be more integrated into either their IP group if they have one, or their corporate group. I think the thing that distinguishes Wilson and other firms, like us, is we do have a standalone department that's just technology transactions, and is a reasonable size across the country. For the type of work that we do, and that is all that this group does. We don't do corporate law and financing. We don't do IP counseling and patent prosecution as well. It's just focused on commercial and strategic arrangements for technology clients.
It's a good phrase that you've got a standalone group as compared to having a couple of tech transaction lawyers that are helping with M&A deals or that are positioned
Correct.
in other groups. That's a great way to think about it, and a good way for students as they look at websites and try to understand firms. To one, is it standalone, and two, how many lawyers are there? If it's just one or two, it probably is a service group for somebody else, finance or standard corporate work, instead of its own destination where tech companies, life sciences companies come to do transactions.
That's exactly right.
Well, so that's a really good question for students to try to explore, and a lot of that will be on the websites, but a few questions can dig that out pretty quickly. Well, I guess then the question is, when you go to law school, it's easy to figure out how to become a litigator. It's easy to figure out how to become an M&A lawyer. But it's not really easy to figure out what the path to becoming a tech transaction lawyer is, because you could take your first year contracts class and not see another contracts class pretty easily. So how do you get from law school to being one of the two of you?
I can talk about my experience. It's probably more serendipitous than I think you guys probably want to position you guys want to be in yourselves. I didn't know the group existed until I summered at Wilson, happened to run into someone who was in tech transactions group. We got to talking, they took me around, introduced me to everyone, tried a couple projects, and I knew almost immediately this is where I wanted to do. I think, students are a little bit more fortunate now that tech transactions is talked about a lot, at least on the schools on the West Coast, at least. Where it's something students are aware of, but I think the best way to figure out if this is what you want to do is to ask questions, right? Take those opportunities that you get during the law school meet and greets, during your summers, to try to ask questions, to try the projects, get a feel for it.
I like Shivang, my path to tech transactions was serendipitous. So I like why did I stay much better than how did I get here as the question. But I agree there is much more information out there now. I think entrepreneurial law clinics of the type that I know Berkeley has and many other law schools have these days is a really good introduction to the sorts of things that you might do as a tech transactions lawyer. It's kind of problem solving for early stage companies who have wonderful ideas and need to then go implement them. So I think if students are looking for what's a way to get a view into that practice, into our practice, without actually having a law school class that you can take, that's one pretty good way into it.
So maybe, Shivang, you'd be a great introduction for the students to understand what a week might look like for an associate, a day or a week or a month. What do you really do day to day? And you threw out a few terms right up front: NDA, different types of contracts. You may have to go into that a little bit more detail.
Yeah, I think it differs based on your level of experience, right? As a junior, a lot of your work will be more heads down, doing the work, right? Being supervised, sitting on calls. But but that's kind of how you cut your teeth, right? You start doing a lot of these, taking the first cut at a lot of these agreements, and you start to get a feel for how we approach commercial contracts, how we think about IP and licenses and assignments. And then over time, you'll start to do more and more of the strategic, more complicated matters, right? So you might start with like your customer agreements, your non-disclosure agreements. You'll over time move on to things like joint development agreements, strategic alliance agreements. And your day-to-day responsibilities also change a little bit from being more heads down work focused to very quickly, honestly, just being more, more calls, more project managing, actually being an advisor to clients, right? I think early as your maybe second, third year, you already kind of have a good base of knowledge, at least in our group, to be able to provide that first line of support for clients.
So Miranda, what are the differences in the life sciences world? I mean, I've made the assumption that you're either in the high tech world or the life sciences world. Maybe that's wrong. You want to start with that, but how does your week, month differ as a partner and as a life sciences specialist?
So I think when you're right, there are some aspects of the life sciences transactional lawyers and Shivang's part of the practice that differ, although the worlds are converging in the arenas of digital health and health tech. But the arrangements that life science lawyers tend to work in, because getting a life science technology to market is, high stakes, high risk, high capital. They tend to be slightly longer term arrangements, or arrangements that have to have a longer term perspective to them than, perhaps some, not all, but some of the sort of software high tech, what you think of as true technology deals, they can get to market a little bit more quickly and with a little bit less capital. So that's one place where the types of transactions that we work on differ. I think the thing that doesn't differ is in a tech transactions practice, and particularly at Wilson, you get to be client facing very early, right? You get to be involved in the client's business and the drafting and the problem solving also from a pretty early stage in your career, for better or for worse, right? And the other thing that you tend to get to do is to look at relationships that I referred to earlier, sort of from their inception through to whatever the company's exit might be. And you have to think about both how would you set a company up for success at the end, and then when you get to the end, how was the company set up in the first place, in terms of its contractual arrangements that allows you to execute on one of those big strategic collaborations. My day, though, is pretty unpredictable. So and Shivang's will be the same. I think we rarely have days where you can go into the day saying this is exactly what I'm going to do today and come out and have ticked all the things that you had on your to-do list. So that dynamic aspect of the practice is something that you need to find energizing rather than innovating in the kind of practice that we work in.
Somebody once told me that as a lawyer, you're paid to solve problems, not work on a task list. And
yeah.
That is a good way to describe the chaos that can be, what I view as transactional. The litigation world, it's kind of linear. So you can run a task list with occasional disruption. But that's maybe goes back to what Shivang was saying at the beginning, that that's probably some of the exciting piece of it, that there are multiple variations of deals, clients that you're going to be working with over a day, maybe over an hour, depending on how your hour goes, but definitely over a week or a month. So never boring, or never the same people over and over.
That's very true.
So, well, I get a couple questions from students. One is, tech transactions just a Silicon Valley or a Boston, or in life sciences, San Diego practice? If I go down this path, am I limited on geographies for the rest of my life? So is this national, or is this just something unique to Silicon Valley and in similar areas?
I would say it's national. I mean, we have offices all over the country ourselves. Texas, DC, Seattle, to name a few, and I work with them regularly. And I think tech companies have started to migrate since COVID, right? It's not necessarily all clustered around the Bay Area. And then also keeping in mind that, a lot of companies hire tech transactions attorneys in-house, and they can be anywhere.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think in many large law firms, and we're not an exception, the hubs of the tech transactions practice tends to be areas of, high technology focus. So the ones that you referred to, Wayne, are, common areas where there are larger numbers of tech transactions lawyers, but we certainly think about the practice in a national way, as do most other large law firms. And we have people who are located in the offices that Shivang just mentioned, and who work remotely too, very successfully since COVID. And then there's also an opportunity, as Shivang mentioned, for folks to do this practice in a company, in an in-house capacity within a biotechnology company or a pharmaceutical company or a large software company. That there's lots of opportunities, not just to work in a law firm in the kind of practice that we do.
So I'd love to follow up on that piece. As a trial lawyer, there aren't many in-house opportunities. Maybe if you want to manage cases, but you're never going to try a case once you've gone in-house. But what you're saying is that in the tech transaction space, you're still going to be doing the deals. I guess there are abundant opportunities in the tech world for transition from law firm to in-house in this area. And the question, I guess, is, does that apply in-house or to life sciences as well as high tech, or is it somehow special?
No, I mean, I'll answer from a life sciences perspective. Smaller emerging companies will often hire a transactional lawyer to manage their day-to-day arrangements and operational agreements in an efficient and effective way, where they're sort of sitting with the business. Larger biotech and pharmaceutical companies often have their own mini, tech transactions department within the company or the legal department themselves, and are running transactions and look to outside counsel, outside law firms like Wilson for either support on those transactions, overflow in deals. So there's plenty of opportunities to do that. And many general counsel need the capability to be able to think through business and strategic transactions as much as, corporate financing issues and employment issues and, data privacy issues. They need a broad range of skills. So it certainly sets you up to be able to do lots of things in an in-house capacity, should you be interested in that.
So really, last question for you. It's easy to figure out how to become a litigator, easy to figure out how to become a corporate lawyer. But when I look at a law school path, as a student, what do I need to take? Beyond if there's an entrepreneurial clinic, what else can I do in school to prepare myself for the practice that the two of you have?
I've always been a fan of just saying be curious and learn about what interests you. And when I was in law school, the only commercial law class we had available was fashion law. So I took it, learned a lot about how, honestly, about how like a company thinks about their products, about the types of trademark issues and copyright issues that they have to deal with. And that has come in handy more than once, surprising, for non-fashion clients in my practice. And the other thing I would suggest is cross-enrolling, right, in other schools in the area if you can, learning about how others think, right, how the engineers think, how the salespeople think, how the policymakers think, can really only be an asset when that comes up in your practice.
I agree with all that, Shivang and Wayne. I think I would say, in terms of traditional law school classes, that tech transactions practice is very focused on intellectual property. So taking courses so that you understand the basics of patent law and copyright law and trademarks and trade secrets is helpful. I think it's also useful to have a sense of how, corporations work and are funded and financed. So a corporations law class is useful, as is a negotiation workshop if you have an opportunity to do one of those. Much of what we do involves negotiations, and Shivang and I were part of a training session ourselves not that long ago. And although I've been doing this for more than 20 years, 2 hours of being taught by in a negotiation workshop, I certainly came away with some tips. So, that sort of thing is also, I think, useful. And industry specific training, as Shivang mentioned, fashion law, video gaming, if there's a school has a life sciences focused course, those sorts of things I think are interesting too.
Wonderful. Well, look, I think you both, 45 minutes, it's hard to cover a topic that really has this much breadth, and often students don't have a foundation in it because there's not a classic tech transaction course that anybody takes as a 1L. But this seems to be an important area for at least technology, life sciences companies going forward, and something it seems that a lot of students should explore. But I do have to ask one question that I have on my list, and students keep asking me, do I need a PhD to be in life sciences? The patent prosecutors get in their head, I think, with that. Do I need an engineering degree or a computer science degree to work in the high-tech area? So I'm going to let you either terrify or put their minds at ease with this question. What kind of background do you need to take your career paths?
I'll go first. So the simple answer is you don't need any particular undergraduate or graduate degree other than a law degree to do this practice. We have many people, and I'm one of them, who have a liberal arts education coming into the practice. There are certainly advantages to having some STEM training in terms of your ability to be able to speak with clients, understand their technology, and quickly absorb the information you're getting about the business and the products and what clients are trying to achieve. But it's not prohibitive. You just I found that I have to just do my own independent reading and be open-minded and ask questions in order to understand what my clients are doing in a way that is maybe a little bit different than my colleagues who have a PhD. So we rely on each other in that way, but you don't need to have a PhD in order to do this practice.
I agree 100%. You don't need a engineering or computer science degree for the high-tech side. I think, being willing to learn about the technology, having interest in learning about the technology, I think is really all you need. And as someone with an engineering background myself, after you've been out of the game for about a decade or so, playing field somewhat evened, right? It's not like I learned about all the about Gen AI when I was an undergrad. So yeah, it's helpful. I don't think it's necessary by any means.
So if I hear you right, as long as you're willing to learn the technology and get to know your client's business, which is going to be based on technology, you're in good shape.
Agreed.
Yep.
Open-minded and curious is, I think, the things that you need to be most of all.
Well, wonderful. Great introduction to this topic. I really appreciate you donating your time to helping our students and helping students nationwide. This will be, I think, eye-opening for a lot of people. So thank you.
Thank you, Wayne. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having us, Wayne.